Today we're just going to cover the first chapter, and some intro material. We'll get oriented, and then we'll cover the first chapter. So you've still got time. There's plenty of other book left to read. So for the next couple of weeks, you'll certainly have opportunity to read along with us. So let's begin with prayer. Is there anything top of mind that we should be thinking about? I'd bring before you Angela Davenport. She's had a particularly rough week, so keep her in your prayers.
I would lift up Kyle McWilliams that grew up in this church, and he's really doing quite poorly with his cancer down at MD Anderson in Houston.
Okay.
And then one of my good college friends, Eric Monastery, went to UT Southwestern, was misdiagnosed, and by the time he got to MD Anderson, it was too late. So he's basically trying to make the most time, and he's got a 13-year-old son. And let him know.
It's not great.
We could spare a thought for these folks in Syria and Turkey. Earthquakes, which the first thing I heard was hundreds dead, and then this afternoon I heard over 11,000 so far.
Whoa.
It's 12. 12 now.
Whoa.
So when you think, like almost four times what we lost on 9/11 in one event, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I imagine that the way that their homes are constructed is not
Right.
helpful.
They talked about that the buildings, there's so much corruption there, that the buildings were very poorly constructed. And, that's the thing, anytime you have darn near dictatorships, is oftentimes corruption is just rampant.
Sure.
Because nobody's able to go.
I remember when you probably all remember in what is it, 2010, when the earthquake happened in Haiti, and there was just mass devastation because these buildings, they're thick floors and very little on the sides, and it was just a sandwich. People were pancaked. It was awful. I imagine that there's similar struggles in Syria at the moment.
Gail Norcross.
Yeah.
She was church Sunday. She's back home.
She is home.
She's
Is Angela, I know you said what she was dealing with septic shock. Is it still that? I know that's
It is the
tough one.
ramifications of that.
Are bad,
Yeah. So yeah, it was the kidneys the other day, and she's having lingering cognitive effects, which is not abnormal for septic shock. So yeah, she's having a rough go of it. Anything worthy of praise?
Finally got
Don't
rain.
be shy. What's that?
Finally got rain.
got
We
some
did.
moisture, yeah.
We did get some rain.
Last week and this week.
And it didn't freeze.
It was just frozen last week.
We did. That's right. It was frozen last week, but we did get some rain too.
A few beautiful days between the ice and the rain.
And we did have a few. This weekend was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Great.
And this coming one's supposed to be nice too, and then we're gonna get more.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Oh, no.
We're on that weekly cycle where it's either hitting on Monday or Tuesday each week.
Fantastic. We all survived that icy week.
Now we know what it's like to be part of the Frozen Chosen.
Lordy, lordy.
All the Presbyterians understand that.
Anything else? Anything good?
Don't tell my wife that I said that.
Oh, I'm telling.
She'll be
Yeah, we're all gonna tell.
mortified.
All right. Let's pray. Gracious God, we are grateful to be gathered together. We are grateful for the many blessings that you lavish us with day after day. Those things that we take for granted, those hidden blessings that we hardly even know that we are the recipient of. we just pray, God, that moment by moment you would open our eyes to the bounty of grace that surrounds us. We also lift before you, God, all these concerns that you have heard tonight, and those that are in the secret depths of us that we don't want to drag out into the light, that are difficult for us to name. And so we pray, Lord, especially for those who are dealing with significant health concerns. We think of Angela and the McWilliams family, and Godwin's friend from college, and we think of the many, the countless folks in Syria and Turkey who are struggling with the loss of loved ones, with the complete upheaval of their lives, and just the immense load that must be. As we turn ourselves tonight to this work, Jesus and the Disinherited, we'll hear the phrase over and over again about people whose backs are against the wall, and I imagine that is how it feels for so many in the region at this moment. So we just pray, God, that the good news of Jesus would be good to them, that they would have some hope, some peace in the midst of this, and that they would find strength from you in this moment. Center our hearts, God. Help us to be open to what Howard Thurman has to say to us as a prophetic voice, and bend our hearts and our wills toward you. All this we pray in the name and for the sake of Jesus, who is our Lord and our friend. Amen. So, Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited. Howard Thurman, here's a little bit of update on exactly who Howard was. He was born in 1899 in Florida, in Daytona Beach. There was no school in Daytona Beach for black folk at the time, and so he went to boarding school in Jacksonville. He ended up at Morehouse College and Colgate Divinity School, and found himself serving as the religious life director at both Morehouse College and Spelman Divinity. He then became dean of the Andrew Rankin Chapel at Howard University, and founded a church in San Francisco, of all places. He kind of bounced coast to coast, this one did, called the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in 1944. And it was there, actually, that he began to write a series of lectures that turned into this book in some form. It was those folks who sort of inspired him and gave him space to do some writing and some cogitating on this work. He ended up a few years later becoming the dean of Marsh Chapel in Boston, at Boston University, which is where he spent the remainder of his career, and then a little bit in the Howard, I think it's called the Howard Thurman Center. But there's a lot of work done on Thurman as a figure in the black world just writ large, and even currently. He was just tidbits about him in 1935. Hi, Gail.
Hi.
In 1935, he met as part of a trip to India. He met Gandhi. He was a huge influence on Martin Luther King Jr., as well as a personal friend of Martin Luther King Jr.'s father, who was, you never can guess this, Martin Luther King Sr. But he wrote, and he wrote this. This is by far, though he was prolific in a lot of ways, this is by far Howard Thurman's most popular work. It came out in 1949, and for us to remember exactly what was going on in the 40s, we are smack dab in the middle of the Great Migration, right? So these are folks who are escaping the Jim Crow South for the economic growth in the North. In 1940, there are lots of firsts are happening in the 40s for black people in America. It is still by no means easy for any of them, but things are happening here and there. Hattie McDaniel, for instance, in 1940, is the first black person to win an Academy Award, which sounds great, except that she is nominated and wins that Academy Award for portraying a slave person in Gone with the Wind. So I guess a first is great, but goodness me. In 1941, we get the Tuskegee Airmen. FDR in 1941 desegregates war production plants and passes the Fair Employment Practices Law. This is really, it's very interesting to me just as you look through the sorts of things that are happening, the sorts of things that people point out as big movement for black folk in the 1940s. So many of them have to do with the military and who's allowed to serve where. This is an economic reality. This is something that, because there were lots of jobs at this point around war production, because we're ramping up here, and black folks one of those jobs too, right? This is, like I said, this is the middle of the Great Migration. People are moving out of the Jim Crow South, and they want access to these jobs. So legislation got passed so that they could make war happen. This is a minor point, but dang it, I'm from Pittsburgh, so I needed to tell you that the National Negro Opera Company opened in Pittsburgh in 1941. And let's not forget, just in terms, because Thurman is not only writing to and for black folk. He is writing to everybody that he says, quote, has their backs against the wall. So let's not forget that between 1942 and 1946, the United States of America put Japanese people into internment camps, right, and imprisoned them because of their race.
Who were American citizens.
Who were American citizens, correct. Yeah. 1943, the Detroit race riots happened. 34 black folk were killed in those. 1944, the Supreme Court rules that whites-only primary races are unconstitutional, so we're getting somewhere. But before then, the primary, any primary in an election was only whites were allowed to vote in those. 1946, there's a ruling called Morgan versus Virginia that rules that segregated interstate travel is unconstitutional. Irene Morgan, highly recommend you look her up. This was a figure that I did not know about, but do a little Googling of Irene Morgan later tonight. She refuses to give up her seat on a bus, which sounds a whole lot like the Rosa Parks situation. Rosa Parks doesn't happen for 10 years, though. I wanted to bring some of these things up to you because it gives you a sense of the world that Howard Thurman is writing into. This civil rights isn't cooking yet. Like, that's not the movement yet. He is like the granddaddy of the movement because people like Martin Luther King Jr. are going to look to his writings like Jesus and the Disinherited, to form how they're going to think about the movement to come, and how they're going to write about it. Anyway, Irene Morgan is on this bus. She refuses to get up. I think she's pregnant at this point, and she refuses to get out of her seat. The bus driver drives her directly to jail, and they come out with a warrant for her arrest. She rips it up in front of the dude and kicks the person that's the officer of the law that is trying to drag her out of the bus and take her to jail. She ends up suing and wins. And so Morgan v. Virginia rules that segregated interstate travel is unconstitutional. 1947, we get Jackie Robinson. Again, this is part of this world. In 1948, Truman, America's worst president. Come at me with that. I will die on that hill. Desegregates the military with Executive Order 9981. Again, black people get in because war, right? It's very interesting. If you're also interested in interesting like racial dynamics that aren't just black folk in the military, the stories from pretty much anybody that's Asian America in the 1940s in their military service are stunning and awful. Because they faced, I don't know if we want to really compare, but it was just as bad in a lot of ways, what Asian folk were going through in the 1940s. At any rate, also in 1948, Perez versus Sharp happens. This is California Supreme Court ruling that legislation making interracial marriage illegal was unconstitutional. This is a full 20 years before Loving versus Virginia. 20 years! These are state laws and state rulings. It is 20 years until we get a Loving versus Virginia. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Anyway, in the face of all this, Thurman is hopeful. Thurman is hopeful for the future. I always love to tell a story. In my undergraduate days, we had to take Greek, and we had this very old Greek professor. His name was Dr. Bowdle. I actually lived in his dorm. They named a dorm after him my freshman year. It had just finished until I was the first person to live in my dorm room. Can you believe that? It didn't smell like freshman boys yet. It was amazing. But he was on the edge of retirement, died just a few years after I graduated. But Dr. Bowdle, I have terrible posture, and he was my hero, my posture hero, because it was like his head was coming out of the middle of his chest. He was so sort of crunched over. But we had Machen was his name, was the author of this textbook that he'd been using forever. Little black book. It's still in my office. I should have brought it up here to show you. But anyway, he would tell us, Greek was hard, and he was a hard teacher, and he would tell us, you are going to, at some point, be so angry that you're going to want to throw this book across the room. Don't do that. Say, open up your textbook to the first page. Let's read the dedication together. Would you like to read this, what it says? It says, to my mother, with love. How could you throw a book that's dedicated to someone's mother across the room? But dedications, they matter. They are important. And so Thurman dedicates his book to my beloved daughters, Olive and Anne, and to the future of their generation, in whom the struggles of the past will find fulfillment. Olive and Anne, actually, Olive is his first daughter to his first wife, who dies when Olive is 3 of tuberculosis, having done work with tuberculosis patients. So Olive is 3 when her mother passes. He marries his second wife about 2 years later, and then they have Anne. And his second wife goes on to be just about as powerful a force as he is in African American studies and in the church. This text is not easy, or it shouldn't be easy for us. I want to encourage you to engage with it as a strange thing. Howard says this. He says, the keepers of the faith of the masters. And let it be said that that's us, okay? The keepers of the faith of the masters often find it difficult and very dangerous to follow Jesus into the hard places inhabited by the disinherited. This is not just true psychologically or theoretically. I mean, listen to the way we talk about the inner city, right? Or even just like, I heard somebody describe to me Lower Flower Mound as the ghetto when I got here, and I was like, what planet are you on? Right? Like, this place is so safe. Like, you could hardly find a safer place to live than where I'm sorry. At any rate, it's just, comparatively, right, our experience of the world here is rose-colored in a lot of ways. Now, let me also say this. That isn't to say, and not so much today, but next week and the week after that, I will, well, not the week after that, because that's Ash Wednesday, but the week after that, I will be pointing out to you the ways where this text really does intersect with everybody's life, not just because to have one's back against the wall isn't only the experience of black people or minorities. There are a multiplicity of ways that you can feel like your back is against the wall. However, his text comes as a challenge to us. The question for him isn't, as we so often engage with issues of race and poverty, what can we do for them? Right. That's not his question. That's not the question he's trying to ask in this text, is what can the rich do for the poor? Or what can the religion of the master do for the religion of the slave or the disinherited? This is not his primary question. His question is, what is the significance of the religion of Jesus to people who stand with their backs against the wall? What is it for them? How does it hit them? How does it equip them to live in this world? He's like, we often hear what we ought to be doing for somebody else who's experiencing hardship. That is not the question that this book is trying to answer. It's not going to get us there. So we're not going to ask it to answer that question. Okay. What we're going to try to do is allow him to frame up this argument as he wants to, and to hear what he has to say about it. He puts it more bluntly when he says this: why is Christianity impotent to deal radically and effectively in discrimination and injustice? Right? Just as a question. Right? And he answers that question in the first chapter. Over and over again, you'll hear if you read this phrase, those who have their backs against the wall. Have you ever felt like this? Can you identify at all with that feeling of helplessness? Ever felt like a caged animal?
I think we've all had tough times. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like what my minority staff deals with on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when just the old comment about, talking to your sons about how to get pulled over by the police. I never had to talk to my son about that.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, isn't the church complicit in some of this when it became bed partners with the government in the Holy Roman Empire?
So, even leaving the historical relationship of Christianity and government out of it, certainly it seems to me that that Christianity is understood to be a respectable, like civilized thing in our culture, right? And he says the price of respectability and security is that its formal expression must be with the strong, always with the strong, over and against the weak. Like, this is the cost of it. If you want to be a part of the most, if you want to be secure and you want to be respected, well, what that means is that you have to sidle up with those who are strong. Which is tough. Like, it is, yeah. Have you
Do we
perceived?
not lose our prophetic nature when we do that?
I don't know, do we? You tell me.
And as you were saying
Rhetorical
about
question.
Flower
Yeah.
Mound being one of the safest places in the world to live, yeah, we have no problems with respectability or security because we are smack dab in the middle of it, whether we like it or not, you know. And we got to ride for a few miles to even find a lack of that.
Mm-hmm. Does it seem, has it ever seemed to you that to speak against or on behalf of somebody outside of the dominant group is to invite the fury of the people in the group, of the strong?
Definitely can.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
The classic for me, which was reading, was Rob Bell, who's current. You know, had this very successful church in the Grand Rapids and thousands of people coming. And one Advent, he decided that, you know, they were talking about coming of the Prince of Peace, so we spent however many weeks on Advent talking about why war was wrong. You know, when 3,000 people left the church, let them know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually he got called a heretic. And he ain't the only one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think his name is Legion.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that comes to mind for me personally is one of our daughters, not the one anybody knows, but the one in England, you know, working for a very respectable company in the Manchester area, and given specific assignments, but she can't do them because the head of the group that she's supposed to be a part of says, "It's mine, baby. I'm not going to say that, but don't you step out of line."
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't take race to feel like your back is against the wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you feel this is what I was called to do,
Mm-hmm.
and if you do it, there'll be severe consequences.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe a little general.
Well, it's just in group. It's in group, out group, right? Like, did I ever tell you the story? I'll tell you very quickly about the time I got cussed out of a garden party at my first call.
Now you got our attention.
Yeah, I was, and I try. I tell this story not because I'm the hero of it, but just because it's a very good example of how these sorts of things work. Right? I am standing in somebody's yard. That a guy from my church invited me to a party. I'm always going to say yes to an invitation. Certainly, I was pretty new at the church too, and I needed to get to know people. So I go, and there are a bunch of people from the block, and a bunch of his buddies, and a couple other people from the church there. And they're talking, and this guy just starts dropping the N-word into conversation. And I'm like, it happens once, and I was like, that happens like 4 more times. And he's saying the N-word and also just like other overtly racist things. And I was like, and we're just like, I've got like a Miller Lite in my hand. Like, this is a very casual situation. And I look over and I'm like, hey, like, you know, like, that's not cool, right? What's not cool? Like, that word is just like very offensive to like everybody that's not here right now, but like everybody. And he was like, we had a little back and forth, and I was trying to be I'm the new pastor, right? I'm trying to be as polite as I possibly can, and also communicate that this is like way out of bounds. And this dude MF'd me out of that yard and into the street and to my car at the top of his lungs. And I was like, oh, how the turntables have turned, right? Like, I was in, I'm just another guy in a circle with a Miller Lite, and then I am out very quickly, right? And it's that, it doesn't take a whole lot to find yourself there, but he thought he had all of the capital, all of the social capital, right? He thought he was in the respectable and secure position, and he was going to wield that against whomever he felt like he wanted to because he could, right? This is how all power works.
There was no advocates for you.
No.
Wow.
No. Colleen, who walked very quickly with me to our car.
Didn't say a word.
But that was it. She also wasn't trying to get in a fist fight that night, right?
Did
So-
he leave the church?
No,
The guy? No.
I mean, that's the way it ended?
That was it.
I mean,
He was just another guy. I mean, Keith was standing there in the garage, but he wasn't ready to go to bat for new pastor over this buddy he's had for 30 years. That's whose kids grew up with his kids, and there's a lot of history there. And I'm me,
wow.
right? So again, it's just find out, right? Say something that. Here's one more quick one. I know this happens every week. The Peace USA got itself in a little pickle this week. A committee made a really idiotic decision, and you can tell anybody I said that, to make for the exegesis exam Judges 19. If you don't know Judges 19, it's the Levite and his concubine. It is an awful passage. It's one of the most horrendous scriptures in all of the Bible. This woman gets gang raped and cut in 12 pieces and sent around Israel. It's awful. It is like as awful as stories get in the Bible. This is it. And some moronic decision making happened, and they decided to make this passage the standardized test for every person that wants to be ordained this go around. Do an exegesis on this passage, tell us what it has to say to our generation, blah, blah, blah. Pretend like you're doing a hard to read Bible study in a college group. This is how they house it. Friends, there are so many other options out there that are like, so it's like trauma triggers for people who've, how many women have experienced sexual abuse in this world? Like, it's like 1 in every 3 or 4. It's insane, right? And you're going to choose that? It's so stupid. At any rate, the controversy over this has blown up. Fox News picks it up and writes an article about it and puts it on their website. And I read that today, and then I made the stupid decision to read the comments. Don't read the comments. Everybody knows this. But it was so funny because in that article about our denomination, they decided to call out just how, snowflakey it is to, like, shouldn't you be able to handle all the Bible if you're going to be a pastor, which I don't disagree with, right? You do need to know how to handle those texts. You don't need to force everybody that's going to be ordained to do an exam on it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have to deal with them. I'm saying this is a bad forum for this. At any rate, everybody's a snowflake because they can't do that. And also, they brought up the LGBT stuff from a number of years ago and how our denomination has sloughed off members and churches because of that to another denomination that's cropped up in its wake. The comment section, y'all, was so crazy because it was like, these people, this was one comment, these people need to be able to handle the whole counsel of God. And who do they think they are? God has blessed America. Can anybody tell me how those two things have anything to do with one another? But this wasn't the only time. Like, this wasn't the only time that people were talking about America as a but this is a thing, right? The master's religion, which is this acceptable, secure thing that we've all just agreed upon that pushes us in no real way, and just everybody is on the same page. Anytime you push on that, it is a threat to the whole thing, right? That's why we call people Nazis all the time. That's why everybody, if you disagree with them or if you criticize America at all, you hate America, right? It's like, it's all this big house of cards that if you pluck on it at all, it all starts tumbling down because it's a threat to the big thing that we're all a part of, that's supposed to be stable, that's supposed to be secure, that's supposed to be respectable. How dare you lift a finger against it? It's all very interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. It's just a lack of courage across the board. Because going back to your Garden Party Miller Lite story,
Yeah.
I think the problems with that story are certainly not you, and not even the big gorilla, but the other people who don't say anything.
Sure.
Because we all want to think that we would have hidden the Frank family in our attic from the Nazis. Because that's who we are. We're good people who would do that. But we wouldn't have done that. Almost nobody does that. The people who do that kind of thing are so rare because they risk everything, not just their lives, but the lives of everybody they care about and everybody they know. We all think we're that person, but we're not even the person who will stand up at a garden party and say, you know, Richie, you gotta cut it out.
His name probably was Richie. I don't remember what
I
it
don't
was.
know. But Jordan Peterson in 12 Rules for Life, he talks about how, you know, the primates do this. There's like the big gorilla who gets his pick of the ladies. But it's a dangerous position to be in because all it takes is a couple of the lesser gorillas to get together and gang up on him, and then he's not the big gorilla anymore. So, you know, people just need to have the courage to speak up. It's like that whole Harvey Weinstein thing that went on for decades until finally somebody said something. But if somebody had said something 20 years before that, then 20 years of misery for all these other people could have been avoided, but nobody had the courage until all this damage had been done. So.
And I think a lot of that is because we think about, like, okay, so if I was in any other position, if the person, truthfully, right, to the example of my story, right, if the person that invited me to that event was like a pillar of the church, do I say anything?
I think you would have said something.
I might have. I would like to think I would.
You just have a big mouth.
I do. This is true.
That whole thing about Truman,
this is true.
for example.
That is true. By the way, it's death toll. It's Hiroshima and Nagasaki that makes them the worst ever. You don't get to kill millions and
Although,
like directly.
They were expecting 1 million casualties in the invasion of Japan. My father was a 19-year-old hospital corpsman in San Francisco on his way to the invasion of Japan when the bombs were dropped and the war was ended. And otherwise there'd be an empty seat here.
That's not fair. All right, listen, I got 5 minutes to get through 20 slides.
Oh, it's my fault.
We're going
That's
into
right.
4 weeks.
Way to go, Mary Kay. All right. Yeah, we probably are going. So what this whole first thing is? How does this Jesus change our perspective on what is said to those who are not in power, to those who do not have any social capital, to those who are in a more vulnerable position than those of us who are just at risk of losing something? They have nothing to begin with. So he wants to point out to you a couple things. One, Jesus was a Jew, a religion drenched in the reality of God. Two, Jesus was a poor Jew. How do we know that Jesus was a poor Jew? Any guesses? It's interesting. Poor Jesus. Somebody read this.
When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, parentheses, as it is written in the law, of the Lord, quote, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, end quote, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord. A pair of doves or 2 young pigeons.
That was what you gave when you were poor? You were expecting
Yeah.
more if you were wealthy?
That is what you gave when you were poor. Leviticus says, when the days of her purification or for a son or daughter are over, she's to bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. Blah, 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 blah. Down to the bold. If she cannot afford a lamb, she is to bring 2 doves and 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Mary and Joseph couldn't afford a lamb. They was po'. The great crowds to which Jesus was speaking were also probably poor. Everybody was poor. By the way, you don't go out for healing if you've got any other option. You don't go see the miracle man or the snake oil salesman if you've got somebody respectable to go see. Which makes him more a son of man than any riches probably ever could have. Jesus was also a minority. Let it be told. 63 BCE, Palestine comes under the rule of the Romans. And in 70, it will be destroyed by them. These are an occupied people. Herod, all the stories about Herod is a puppet to the Romans, right? These are occupied people who are scared. Thurman asks, is it reasonable to think that Jesus, who lived between the annexing and the destruction of Jerusalem, simply did not care about the issues of his day? Right? Like, we read Jesus as if he's like just this spiritual guru. Do we not think that he was speaking directly to the issues that were present in everyday conversation always? Which would have been the Romans, right? And their occupation. What are people talking about right now? We're all worked up about the price of eggs, for goodness sakes. Right? Do you not think that people would have been worried about the fact that the Romans controlled them? If that's but Chinese spy balloon had taken over the airwaves in America, do you think we would not be talking about that right now? Right? Like, of course. I mildly edited this. Don't talk about politics in church. It only stirs the pot. Jesus. He's stirring a pot. Yeah. There is, Howard Thurman's got no love for Paul, and that's because there's a world of difference between the world of Paul and the world of Jesus, right? Jesus was a Jew in occupied territory who had no rights. Paul, on the other hand, was a Roman citizen, and he uses this to his advantage. He, at one point, appeals to Caesar, right, to get out of trouble. It's his trump card, and he uses it. And he ought to. It's his right. He can. But Thurman tells a story about how his grandmother or great-grandmother, I can't recall, she said that, you know, they'd be preached to, wouldn't even allow them to have and she was a slave, wouldn't even allow them to have a black preacher. They'd bring in somebody to preach, and she'd tell them, the preacher would tell them about how Paul wrote that slaves ought to obey their masters. And she said, I don't got any time for that. This is not good news to me. That Paul can do his thing, but he ain't speaking to me. Right? Give me Jesus. Dang it. We need to stop because we're about to go down the
Big rabbit hole.
yeah.
Jake, I don't understand you saying Jesus is a minority, because I remember a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus when I was growing up.
Everybody loves Aryan Jesus. He
I've
is.
seen pictures of him.
Yeah, no, curly blonde locks. Yeah, he's gorgeous.
He is.
Yeah, no,
His
we
robe was
gotta.
always white, unless they had a washing machine.
That's right.
Life was good.
No, but who's your Jesus that you love? Who's that meme
The
you use all the time?
the Jesus that I love.
Yeah, I mean, the
I've shown you a picture.
Yes,
He's.
but the one,
Are you talking about buff Jesus?
not but
I got lots of
somebody-
Jesus
I
memes.
got lots of Jesus memes. It was from some movie or something.
Oh, Buddy Christ!
Yes, Buddy Christ.
Yeah, Buddy Christ has got brown hair at least. I think he still does have blue eyes though. Yeah, Buddy Christ is from.
He's so relatable.
Oh, I can't remember what movie he's from. All right, we got to pick up kids.
Hilarious. Okay.
So,
I don't know, it's just
like I said, we're gonna. I can make it the rest of the way, but not tonight. We have to go.
because that's a lot.
It's gonna be a lot. Thank you for coming.